become stuck in over-analysis, frustration, or the pressure to find perfect solutions. I think sometimes we just kind of give up and deal with a system that doesn't really work for us, or just accept a problem as something we can't change. So the Kata approach offers a practical alternative. It is a structured way of thinking that encourages us to break challenges into manageable steps, test assumptions, learn from outcomes, and make steady progress over time. To guide us through today's conversation, we are pleased to welcome Jennifer Katongole, a continuous improvement coach and process improvement practitioner, that's a tongue twister, with extensive experience helping individuals and organizations navigate complexity through structured thinking and practical experimentation. Her work focuses on building systems and habits that support clearer decision-making, adaptive learning, and sustainable progress in fast-moving professional environments. Jennifer applies her expertise in continuous improvement on a daily basis, not just in her own life, but also in her role as process improvement specialist for global programs at Medical Teams International. So Jennifer, it's truly delightful to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Lynette. It's great to be here.
And so before we get into Kata specifically, can you tell us how you came into this work of really helping people to think more clearly and to improve the way they work? It's truly an area of work that I didn't know existed as, you know, an area of expertise and work before I met you, to be honest. So it would be very good to know more.
Yes, great. Thank you, Lynette. And funny enough, I didn't know this world existed until about 7 years ago. And so I can share that even as a kid, right? I was one of those high achieving kids who always wanted to have the right answer, do things the right way. And so I really love processes, right? Because typically processes get us to where we want to go. And so I would intuitively practice things relating to process improvement, tweaking, trying things. How do we get this better? And so it was, as I said, a few years ago that I learned there was a whole discipline called continuous improvement. And that actually helps us to methodically work through problems and get better over time. And so I think what I have learned over the last several years is it is much less about being the smartest person in the room, about being certain, about having the answers, but is much more about having a process that you know will help you get to the answers. And so that is a lot of my work now. I am not necessarily the one figuring out the processes or having the answers, but my job is to help people think more clearly, to see the facts of the situation. And one of the key ways I do that is through Kata coaching.
Okay, interesting. And so where does Kata come from? Is it a leadership tool? Is it a problem-solving tool? Or is it something entirely different?
Yeah, great question, right? So Kata, it came out of a research study in the early 2000s, actually of Toyota, the car manufacturer. And they are well known across the world for excellence in manufacturing. People write books about them, people visit their plants. But still, when people try to do the things that Toyota does, they were not getting the same results. And so there was this sense that there must be some underlying way of thinking and behaving that Toyota practices. And what is that? So it was in 2004 that a team from the University of Michigan, led by Mike Rother, went to study Toyota for 5 years. And they had two key research questions. The first was, what are the unseen managerial routines and thinking that lie behind Toyota's success? So what are they doing differently? And then secondly, what can other companies do to develop that way of thinking and behaving? And as they studied over those 5 years, they found that there was very fundamental differences in how people approach tasks and how they approach problems and the manager's role in supporting teams. And so they had two big discoveries. The first is that Toyota has a systematic, scientific way of thinking and behaving. They saw that the teams would take these very small incremental steps and experiment their way forward rather than jump to conclusions. And then the second is that I saw that the managers really viewed their roles as helping the team to think and behave in this scientific way. Now, maybe in the West, the model of leadership is more kind of command and control. I'm the boss, I tell you what to do, you execute. But really what they learned from Toyota is that much more the manager was a coach. They coached with open questions. They would encourage staff, guide staff to use that scientific mindset. And so that's one thing that I really love. And I know we have several women on the call today, is I think it gives us a different model of leadership, right? Whereas sometimes we've inherited a model that's so much about like, you got to know the answer. If you don't have the answer, it's weakness. No. What the research shows is that your job is not to be the person with the perfect answer, but it is to help people learn their way through uncertainty and ask questions. And that is what we practice in scientific thinking.
Wow. That's really amazing, Jennifer. And I feel in a way you've summarized what good leadership looks like, that you are not actually the one to provide answers, to say this is the way, and to also not think of people as these static implementers, but to actually build a team of thinkers, to coach people to really think outside the box, look for solutions, as a way of truly investing in your people and enabling them to discover their own potential. So that sounds really like an amazing leadership tool at the end of the day. So you mentioned scientific thinking quite a few times in that description, and in Uganda, like when I hear the word scientific, I think of scientific weddings, and that was weddings with like 3 or 4 people during COVID. But I want you to talk a bit more about scientific thinking, as understood through the Kata approach. Why do we need it? Like, it sounds a little bit abstract to have scientific thinking in your everyday life. You're not a scientist. And what's wrong with just normal processes of thinking, legal thinking, practical thinking?
Yeah, great point. Hey. And I think too, I know in Uganda, my teens are being asked, are you taking a science bias or an arts bias in school? Almost as if those are 2 different things and the one doesn't need the other. But actually, when we talk about scientific thinking, this is why we need it, right? Our brains are incredible. They can process huge amounts of information. And most of the times they need to fill in the gaps, right? That helps us survive. Otherwise, if we had to make a decision about every single little thing, we would be overwhelmed. But that same brain that helps us make sense of the world by filling in gaps can also incorrectly fill in those gaps, right? You could read an email and think that the tone was hostile when that's never what they intended. You could assume that a client is going to love your proposal, and then you find out that they really didn't. And those assumptions in the moment can feel like facts until they're proven otherwise. And when they feel like facts, we make decisions based on them, right? And so I'm assuming, like, right in the field of law, that folks are trained to think deeply, to think about their arguments, to think about how they're going to persuade, how things are going to be interpreted. Like, it's a very cerebral field. And that is a strength in the field of law. But when we're thinking about kind of everyday human interactions, we can be misled by our overthinking, by the story our brain is creating. So the danger is not that we have assumptions. We know we will have assumptions. We can't get away from that. The danger is if we don't realize we are acting on assumptions because they feel so true to us. So if we know that these assumptions and bias are part of being human, what can we do to overcome that? So the answer is we need to notice our assumptions. We need to learn when we are jumping to solutions. And we can learn how to think and behave in a more effective way, a way that's more methodical, a way that's logical. It's based on facts and evidence. And that is really what we call scientific thinking. So just like a scientist in the lab, right? They make a hypothesis and they run an experiment to test that hypothesis. When we say scientific thinking, this is what we mean. We're saying, okay, well, what do I know? What might I be assuming? So what do I expect is going to happen? And then test that and look at, well, wait, what actually happened? And what did I learn? And when you go through that process, that's how we move from assumptions to evidence, right? We're not getting stuck in our own interpretations, but we're testing reality.
Okay. Well, I guess, that really gives you a way of identifying your assumptions, or really knowing what it is that you assume. Because I think what makes an assumption so slippery and tricky is that you don't actually even realize it's an assumption until you go through this process of interrogating it, because it's you just assume that that's a fact, and you assume it's the truth. So it actually helps you to know what it is that you're assuming, and you're perhaps building structures on things that are not really, not really truth in reality. So yeah, that's very interesting. And why is it called kata? Like, I know like some Japanese connection, but I think it's probably a new word for most people listening.
Yes, it was new to me also when I learned it. So a kata is simply a term that means it's a routine or a pattern of behavior that you practice to build that muscle memory and perfect a new skill. So if you think of like a musician, right? Musicians practice scales, just this group of notes, up and down, up and down, up and down. And they practice that so that later they can play their music. Or like a sports team. So a sports team practice drills. Maybe in football, you practice shooting, you practice dribbling, again and again, 5 days a week, so that on Saturday you can play that 1 2-hour game. And those are katas. That is practicing a skill in a safe environment so that you build that endurance, you build that stamina and muscle memory, and you can call upon it when you need it. And so Mike Rother and the team decided to call what they learned kata because they saw several routines for practicing scientific thinking. And when we practice these routines, we are training our brain to think more clearly. And so there are many katas, but there's just 2 I want to talk about today. And the first overarching one that the team identified is called the improvement kata. So if I had a whiteboard, which I don't, I would sketch, but imagine this with me, okay? So imagine you guys have a mountain, and at the top of the mountain, there is a flag. And that flag is your challenge. You want to get to that thing so bad, but you are at the bottom of the mountain and you have no idea how to get there. You have no idea if there's a path even. You don't know if there's a ravine. You don't know if there are waterfalls. You literally have no idea, but you know you need to get up there. So the first thing we do in the improvement kata is we identify what's our challenge, what's our goal. The second thing we do is we take a moment to grasp the current condition. We look around, we're at the bottom of the mountain, and we say, okay, where are we? What's currently happening? What do I know? What do I see? What are the facts as of today? And best you can grabbing the facts. As you said, Lynette, sometimes the things even feel like facts, so we may not realize they're assumptions, but best you can get the facts of the situation today. That's step 2. So once you know where you are today, step 3 says, okay, you need to not aim for that top of the mountain. That is too big. But aim for the next milestone. Where do you want to get to next? That might be in 1 week, 2 weeks, something very short, right? Mm-hmm. And we call that a target condition. So name what is the next milestone you want to get to. And step 4 is really where this experimenting comes in, where we are experimenting our way through obstacles. And so we take small steps where we try something. We say, oh, I have a hypothesis that we need to go this way. So then we try and go this way. Oh, no, we got blocked. Okay, well, now my hypothesis is let's try and do this. And we experiment ourselves forward and we learn along the way. And those are small steps we test on our way to the target condition. And ideally, after 1 to 2 weeks, right, we've made progress. We're not where we were before. We're certainly not at the top of the mountain, but we're not where we were before. And so that step 5, we call pause and reflect. You just take a moment, sit on your bench, on your hike, take a little breath and look back. Okay, what did we do? What did we overcome? What have we learned in the process? All right, take another second to look around. Where are we in now? And then set that next target condition, that next 1 to 2 weeks. And that is how you experiment your way up the mountain. You figure out, okay, how am I going to get up there? And even sometimes we get to that pause and reflect and we realize like, oh, actually, that's not the mountain we need to be on. We need to be on that mountain over there. Like actually the challenge is slightly. But we couldn't have known that until we experimented our way forward. So it's not a bad thing. It is just a learning, right? And I think that approach and that metaphor is so helpful because as humans, we have a bias towards action, right? Like we want to start doing things. That is just who we are as a species. And that can be useful. But it also means we can like try and run straight towards a solution without really understanding what's happening or if that solution is even going to work. And so if I think about, your world when that someone would be like, oh, we need to have a meeting so we can decide X. Oh, we need to have a memo on this. And maybe those are the right options, maybe. But is there a small step we can take first to test if that next step is going to work and get you to where you want to go? So this Kata process helps slow down our thinking enough that our actions become smarter. We are more deliberate and we're more connected to learning rather than assumptions.
Quite a mouthful, and it sounds, it sounds amazing, but it also sounds like, okay, there's quite a lot to internalize, quite a lot to understand.
Yes.
And so how do we just very simply start
Yes.
to practice Kata, and to, how do we learn to think more scientifically, and, to also just gain a better understanding of how you do the steps, or like what would you recommend?
Exactly. Yes. So that was the big picture framework. And within that, there's several small things you can do, but there's just one that I want to focus on today, right? So the best thing you could do is to start experimenting, to practice the art of slowing down, to be more logical, more methodical, more based in facts and evidence by documenting and running small experiments. And I'm not even saying, extra things on top of your workload. No. I'm just saying taking one or two actions that you already have on your to-do list and framing them up as experiments. And one of the best ways you can do that is through this document called the experimenting record. And so what I want to do quickly is just run through the experimenting record. And then I know, Lynette, this is something you've been practicing with, so I'd love if you could share an example of using it. And I'm just wondering,
Sure.
Do we have a digital file that we could drop in the chat for participants?
Yes, I'm dropping it right now, and I'll pin it, so it's a link that you can follow if you want to open the experimenting record. And it's just in the chat. I'm not so sure how to pin it, but it's right there in the chat. And so you're welcome to open it, and then you can see the document that Jennifer is going to take us through.
Yeah, that'll make it a little bit easier. Great. All right, so this experimenting record is a very simple structure for documenting one small experiment at a time. And so I'm going to run through the boxes, and then Lynette's going to explain how she actually used them. So the very first box up here says, what is your obstacle? And an obstacle is something you name that you're trying to overcome, or maybe it's something you're trying to understand. It could be something like, I don't know XYZ, right? But it's that thing that right now you feel like is, oh great, I'm glad you're able to pin that, is stopping you from moving forward. So first name your obstacle. Once you name your obstacle, we go to next step. So what is the one thing you're going to do? Not the 30 things you're going to do, but what is the one thing you're going to do today to try to overcome that obstacle? And get detailed there. Be very specific about what you're going to try to do, because that's your experiment. Now, the next step is really important, and I think it's the one our brains kind of automatically miss, but it's, what do you expect, right? We don't take actions usually random. We usually have a very rational reason for doing the thing we're going to do, but we don't always name for ourselves, what do we expect is going to happen when we take that step? What do we expect to feel? What do we expect to see? What do we expect to hear? And so by naming that, this is where we kind of plan what we're going to do, right? And then this line in the center just represents do that experiment. So the thing you just said you're going to do, go do it. But then come back to this and write down what actually happened. Tell the story of what happened with facts, with data, with evidence. And you see these boxes are not too big. So we're not asking you to like write an essay, but just list actually what happened. And then the last part to me is the most fun part and where the biggest impact can come. And it's, what did you learn? So if you look back at what you planned to do and what you expected, you compare that to what happened. What did you learn? Was there anything different? Did it go the way you thought? Are there surprises? Because that learning will then inform your next obstacle and your next step. Maybe that obstacle has been overcome. Maybe you found out through that step that like, oh, that had literally no effect and I thought it was going to help. Maybe you find a new obstacle and you do it. But this is the way you're slowing down your thinking so you become more methodical in your steps. So I'm wondering, Lynette, if you want to just give a brief example of something that you practice this on. I think you said in your personal life you're able to use it, hey?
Yes, I did. And also this year, I've been really looking for new ways of like just managing like my workload and being healthier, having just better structures in life, having more rest. Like, so this year I was I was really set on finding better ways of really thriving as a working mom. And so, so Jennifer introduced me to this and like the baby steps that you take. And I thought, like, I decided the first thing that I'm going to test it on is something that I'm like, this is a really simple challenge. And I think I ought to have just been able to solve it by now, but it's kind of a recurring challenge. And that was that I struggled to be on time to leave the house on a Monday. So my husband and I, we drive together. He drives me in Tinder. He continues to where he's going. And and he's very structured. He wakes up at a certain time. He packs everyone's lunches. And when we are supposed to get in the car at 6:30, somehow he's ready and I'm not. And I just decided, let me just take this one simple challenge, which I'm like, but this is such an easy thing. Why do I even need the whole process? I need the whole process because it's a recurring challenge that I've not solved. So that was what I chose first. And so, I described the obstacle. My husband's always ready. I'm always not. He's a little bit frustrated. We have a little bit of friction in the car. It's not necessary. And, this is a simple thing. This is the obstacle. The steps that I decided to take immediately was I'm going to pack my bag the night before. I'm going to prepare like the outfit that I'm going to wear to make sure it's ironed, to make sure the shoes are clean, like the whole thing of my clothes are ready. And I'm going to wash my hair on a Sunday evening. So that's not something I have to worry about on a Monday. And so that's what I then decided to do. But then the first Monday I did those things and I was actually still late. So then I went back and I was like, this is a small thing. Why do I have to reflect on this? But I did reflect on it. And I thought about, so what happened that made me, I took my steps, but why was I still not on time? And I thought maybe I'm still trying to do too many things on a Monday morning, because I would wake up early and then I would think I can do exercise and prepare reports, get, like I have this like extensive quiet time because that's how you're supposed to start the week. But like, I would have all these things running on my Monday morning schedule and then think I could still be on time to get in the car when we have to leave at 6:30 a.m. And so so then I realized, maybe I should just plan a little bit more realistically with what I can fit in on a Monday. So then the next week I continued, like I repeated the steps, like, did the things like lay out the clothes, wash the hair, like pack the bag. But then I also didn't plan to get a lot of work done getting in the car on a Monday morning to go. And I just planned a little bit more realistically. And then, I was on time. It worked well. It was a nicer experience. There wasn't a lot of friction. Like we could start the week in a nicer way. And then, reflecting on that, I realized, but I tend to plan very unrealistically. Like I tend to be incredibly optimistic generally about what I can do in a specific amount of time. And specifically early on in the week when I have a lot of energy, I think I can do so many things. And then I don't delegate as much as I really should at the beginning of the week. Then I get stuck at the end of the week. Then I end up working late over weekends because I'm exhausted. I'm like, oh wow, this is a whole pattern that I had identified and that I'm not able to address because I see it. But it started with, man, why can't I just be in the car at 6:30 on a Monday? So so that was my first experience with this.
Oh, I love hearing that again, Lynette, because I think that like just shows the power of Kata and what you said. Like you started with this one thing that you're like, this is so simple. I'm an adult. I should be able to get my act together and be on time. And you're like, I can't. And yet even through running that one cycle, that what actually happened kind of opened your eyes to like, oh, I'm trying to do the exercise. I'm trying to do these extra things. And you just maybe hadn't named, we just as humans don't always see what we're doing, but it forced you to look at what you were doing, the facts and evidence of it. And then you said even by week 2, like it had made a change of this thing that you'd been struggling with for a long time, even in just 2 weeks, like you had kind of retrained yourself, which is incredible. And I think that experience you said then of learning more about your time optimism and how that affects your ability to delegate, that really, guys, like everyone on the call, that is what I have found to be the power of Kata, is you kind of start with this one very tiny problem and you work on that, but you learn so much more about yourself and your habits that you start to see the threads to other part of your life. And like that can truly transform your life. You can start to realize like, oh, but I could apply that thinking here and I could apply that thinking here. And all of a sudden you're getting out the door in the morning is like affecting your life work balance and how you delegate. And so I think it's a really lovely story. Thanks for sharing, Lynette.
All right. And so that was really my example that that I thought this is something I can share. Let me just stop sharing my screen. And yeah, but then really moving on in terms of examples and how this applies in life. Like I was wondering, Jennifer, like moving us ahead. Can you give us
Yes.
some other examples really that, like now we've discussed something that is very, like very practical, very everyday, but how about legal work? How about leadership? How about other areas of life? And, that the people
Yes.
on our call face every day. And, could you provide us like some guidance, examples?
Very much so, very much so. So one thing I love about this structure is that you can literally use it for any task, like any task at work, any task in your personal life. And the one place I like to start by looking is your to-do list, because almost all of us have a to-do list, right, of actions we need to get done. And so maybe it's a conversation you need to have, maybe it's a meeting you need to run, maybe it's a habit you want to build, like, I don't know, you want to start journaling or something like that. So instead of just having your list of to-dos, go back and add a column to that. Add a column for what do I expect when I'm going to do that thing. And then once you go try and do it, come back and write down, what actually happened and what did I learn? And so when you use those very ordinary daily things and treat them as experiments, that is helping you to slow down your thinking and to act in a more methodical way. And just like you said, Lynette, I've heard from many, many people that are like, oh, it feels kind of ridiculous to write this down. Like it's so small and it's slowing me down. People sometimes say that. But that is the point of this practice routine. Just like an athlete is like, oh, I don't want to practice dribbling again. I know how to dribble. You're actually building that muscle memory. So when you need it in other parts of life, you have it. So if I give you two examples, let me start with the work one. So for instance, last week, we had a meeting at work that didn't go very well. I heard from a couple stakeholders didn't go well, and I was a participant. And I wanted to follow up with one of the co-organizers, and I know her pretty well, and I was like, hey, let's brainstorm about the next meeting, because I think I have a bit of a pulse on what the stakeholders need. So I wrote down that obstacle was that this first meeting of this new group didn't meet the stakeholder needs, and that was not helping to build trust with the stakeholders. So that's my obstacle. So my step was, I want to schedule a meeting with this co-organizer and brainstorm ideas. And my expectation in doing that was that she would be able to influence the meeting leader, right? I also expected that she also thought that meeting didn't go well, and she'd be very receptive to my ideas. We usually think in the same ways. So I was like, great, let me send a meeting invite. Let me send her a Teams message letting her know I want to meet and this is why. She accepts it. But what actually happened then is I had another colleague who was in that meeting find me later in the week and say, hey, were you going to talk to that person about the meeting? I was like, yeah, we're meeting next week. You're like, just FYI, I happened to see her, and she is maybe a little bit sensitive about how that meeting went. So as you talk to her about this feedback, just know that she's feeling a little raw. I was like, oh, okay. So that is what I learned. I had to write down, we are probably not on the same wavelength. And so I need to have all the grace as I go into this conversation, because she maybe, I don't know, I have assumptions. Did she think it went fine? Did she think, I don't know what, but I'm getting this data from another colleague who talked to her that said, hey, just kind of watch how you phrase it. And so that helped me then in my next step of actually having the meeting to say, okay, I'm going to go in with this approach. I actually planned out, I was going to kind of freewheel the conversation, but I actually thought, okay, what are the 3 questions I want to ask her? And that if we had those answers, that will help the next meeting go better and she can influence the meeting leader. And so I wrote those out and I added those back into the agenda. And that then I expected would help me to have the right posture in the meeting and help her to be more receptive to what we were talking about. And then the meeting did go. I was able to adjust my position. But it really slowed me down, right? Setting up a meeting invite is not a big task, guys. But just by doing this process, it helped me to prepare better and be more methodical in that. And then maybe just a very small personal example, just to show how really small you can break this down, right? I had hurt my toe a few weeks ago and wasn't able to wear shoes for several weeks. Then thought that it seemed healed. And I was like, great, I'm going to go on a walk with my friend for an hour. And the night before the walk, I thought, what if my toe is not better? What if wearing a shoe for an hour is a terrible idea? And I got a little anxious, oh, did I plan this prematurely? And then my brain said, wait a second, you can test this. Like, this is a hypothesis that your toe is better. And so I was like, how can I test it? Okay, I have 20 minutes. I'm going to put on my walking shoes. I'm going to go walk in the neighborhood, and then I'm going to check how I feel afterwards. And so I did that. And when I came back, my foot felt fine. I took off my shoes and socks, looked at my toe looked fine. And then I had learned, okay, at least I know I can do a 20-minute walk. Now, of course, it's still a hypothesis. I can make it to the hour-long walk the next day, but I felt much better about taking that step than if I just tried to go into going on a big exercise walk when I haven't exercised in 3 weeks. And so it can be that small, everyone, and that really helps you slow down your thinking, test your hypothesis, and name that you had some assumptions and you had a hypothesis. So let's test it before we move forward.
Okay, that's really, really practical. Thank you for those really clear examples, and also showing the value of, I guess, slowing down to think and to interrogate your thinking, and to do that by putting these things on paper. Because I think it's, like you say, we don't like to slow down. We like to jump into action. We don't like to jump to conclusions without realizing it. It really is a discipline to slow down enough to think, to slow down enough to write, to reflect. What am I expecting before? What did I learn after? But then I like what you said, that your brain said, and your brain said that because you've been training your brain to like tell you certain things of, you don't know, or you're unsure. Oh, just go test it. Just, test your hypothesis, and then you have facts, and then, you can make a very good decision. So it's really interesting to see it work out in practice, and to see like the benefits and what you gain by having taught yourself to slow down and reflect and think and write down. So thank you for sharing that. But I would also like us to bring it to more like practical, professional examples, really, for the people in the school. We have many staff, and FIDA staff, FIDA members, as well as other folks on the school. But how can Kata really help people to move from like the overthinking or the challenges in legal analysis, or like the problems we face in the kind of things that we handle every day? And I'm thinking if we can give like an example that comes up often from our legal aid staff, like what to do if you have a client who is facing a problem. You want, like, it's very, very often it's between like a man and a woman who's in a relationship, a wife and a husband who are in a difficult place in their marriage, and there's an issue about maintenance, there's an issue about custody, and it all can really be resolved very easily, but it's sometimes very difficult to convince the man to engage in the mediation. Like, it can be, it can be really, really tricky to get them to understand that there are benefits to just sitting down and talking this through and coming to a solution that you both agree on. And, for an example like that, could you apply this Kata method, or do you need to break it down into even smaller pieces? What can you advise lawyers on the school who face this problem very often?
Yeah, no, that sounds like something I imagine is dealt with every day. So what I'm hearing, and I think I'm going to ask you to unpack a little bit more, Lynette, is the first thing we want to do, right, is identify the obstacle we think is in the way. We're not fully sure it's in the way, usually, but we think it's having an impact. So you said a man who refuses to come to mediation. What are some ideas that you have seen of why a man would not come to mediation? Can you just give me some of those, and then we can work through it?
Yeah, like I think, Claudia or anyone else on the call can even help me, but I think like some of the things would be that they think, oh, but FIDA is definitely just on the women's side, they're not going to be fair, and they're just like after my money, like, or to think, I don't have an obligation, here, I can just ignore this, nothing will happen, or to think that, oh, but let the courts decide this, like that could be some of the thinking that men have, that they would be like, oh yeah, but we can actually get away with not engaging in this process, or the process is not really going to be to my benefit, and like I have no reason to believe that I'm going to gain anything by actually engaging in this. They're just going to be against me, they're going to break me down, they're not going to be fair to me. And so I would say like that those are some of the obstacles. And would anyone like to share like a different kind of reason why you think it would be difficult to get a respondent to engage in this kind of mediation? Okay, yeah, nothing from the team. Maybe I explained it as if I also would.
Yeah. Well, and what I heard you say, Lynette, in those many obstacles is there was a lot of different types of thinking perhaps from a man, right? And so maybe it's one of those factors, maybe it's multiple factors. So there could be many obstacles. So sometimes what I coach people do is I say, first, just write down a list of all the possible obstacles. So just like you said, it'd literally be taking what you said and write it down. And I even call it like an obstacle parking lot, right? Like we're not saying we're going to address everything at once, but we've parked them there, we've named them there. And then I would look at that list of obstacles and say, okay, which one do we think is having the biggest impact? And maybe, okay, I'm just going to make this up for the example. Maybe you don't know the client super well. So you're like, I am not sure if it's that he doesn't understand mediation or he does understand it really well and he's not willing to do it. So your first obstacle is you don't know what his view is of mediation and why he's not showing up. So by naming that obstacle in the experimenting record, the next step you might take is figure out if he knows much about mediation, just to say that way. And maybe you expect, because you're like, oh, maybe, a lot of the guys don't know about it. So my expectation is that he doesn't know about it. And so maybe your step is you're going to send a staff member to talk to him. Maybe your step is you're going to try, I'm making this all up, I don't know your role, but maybe you're going to have a clergy member explain it to him. Maybe it's, oh, I'm going to find a trusted friend to talk to him. Maybe it's, we're going to type it up and hand it to him. Like, what is the step you're going to take to try to explain mediation to him? And so you figure out in detail what that step is and write what you expect to happen and then try to do that step and then come back and see, maybe he received, I'm making this up, the letter and he's like, oh, I know all this, like, but I still don't want to do it. Well, now you've learned something. Now you know it's not an information gap. It's something else. Like maybe it's a motivation gap. And so that's a learning. Maybe you find out like, oh, like what happened is they were a bit more receptive, but still pretty wary and not trusting of FIDA. Okay, so now you know they don't trust FIDA. Okay, so what can we do as a next step to get them to trust FIDA? Who maybe would they trust, right? So you see, when you're not quite sure what's happening in someone's head, this process can help you test one small thing to learn one more thing and then figure out how to move forward. And it might take, many cycles of practicing this to get to finally what's happening. But rather than sitting in a meeting and say, I'm sure as soon as we write it out and hand it to him, I'm sure he'll agree. Like that's basing it off of an assumption, right? Rather now you're testing your assumptions and learning your way forward. Does that help?
Yeah, I think it does. It would be nice, also to know from people who face this particular challenge if that sounds doable. So if you have a view on whether you think this can actually work for this very common problem that we face, it'd be nice to hear from you in the chat or like in the Q&A, like section, which we'll get to shortly. But before we get to that, and if the people on the call who have listened and heard about how you speak about this actually want to get started and try this for themselves, like what can they do? What can they do to get started as Kata practitioners?
Yes, very much so. So, the first thing you can do to start experimenting is using that document that Lynette put in the chat. So that's often what I ask people to do. I say, hey, just print out 5 of those. And every day this week, pick 1 or 2 things you were already going to do and frame them up as your next steps and write down what you expect to have happen. Go do the thing and come back and write what happened and what did you learn. And those can be 5 separate things. It's not that it needs to be, oh, and then the next day you keep working on it, and the next day you keep working on it. They can just be 5 random things. But that practice will start to train your brain to ask yourself those 4 questions and slow down your thinking. If you don't have a to-do list or you don't want to do it based on your to-do list, the other way I suggest using that sheet is to do these like fun mini experiments, right? Like, I don't know, maybe your next step is brush your teeth with the opposite hand. What do you expect is going to happen when you brush your teeth with the opposite hand? It's going to force you to really pay attention. Like, what is my hand doing and how does my mouth feel? And then write down what happens and what did you learn? Or maybe eat lunch in a different spot or look up photos on your phone from a year ago. What do you expect to find? And I know that maybe seems like very silly. And you're like, Jennifer, I have enough other things to do in my life than brushing teeth with the opposite hand. But it's a very low risk way to practice this way of thinking, right? Like there are no consequences to brushing your teeth with the opposite hand, and you can do it in a minute. And so I'd encourage you to try it, right? And if you find that you try it and you're like, oh, wow, like this is actually very interesting and I want to learn more about this, there is a website called Practice Kata. It's run by a good friend of mine, Gemma Jones, and she actually has a 6-week workout of these worksheets. So actually the one that I was holding up today, this is from the Practice Kata workbook. And so there's more kind of, teaching and tips and tricks in there about how it works. But that's really what I would encourage you to do, is just try to use the sheet, try to practice these 4 questions. And remember, if you feel stuck, don't just ask like, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? No, think about, okay, what should I do? What's the obstacle in my way? And what do I expect is going to have happen? And then come back and test that after you do it. So you don't have to solve the whole problem today. You just need to identify that one next thing that you don't understand or you think is in your way. Take one small step and then learn from what happens. And that's how you experiment your way through hard things.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's been really amazing to hear you speak about this. And I think also to understand that ultimately you are learning a new way of thinking because you are training your brain. So even if you feel like, oh, this is such a long road and I'm not getting the answers, and but to actually understand that ultimately what you are doing is you are training your brain to actually think in a way that is ready to experiment, that is ready to really question assumptions, identify assumptions. It can really lead you to a place where you operate differently in your everyday life, in your work, which is quite an amazing place to be. And so I would like to ask to our participants and everyone who's been listening and for most of the school, do you have any questions for Jennifer? Do you have anything that you would like to ask her, or any more information? And you would see in the chat that I've just posted the website, the Kata website, that Jennifer had spoken about, where there is like these options of how do I practice more, how do I what is it that I can do, how do I get connected with groups that practice this, so there are these options. So please do put up your hand or put your question in the chat if you want to. And Joanne, you are the first. You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, is it Joanne? Do you have your hand raised?
Hi, Lynette. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. Okay. I just wanted to comment on Lynette's question on the whole community thing with giving legal aid to men. I mean, most of our clients being men. I personally do not think it would work within that assumption, but I think it works perfectly for advocacy. And reason being is because most of our respondents require a long shot, really, a mindset change, because it's a place they have for women within their mind that I don't think it's typical overnight. But I think it works best for advocacy, where we're working with different government officials, different NGOs, different stakeholders within the space. It makes it more meaningful to have to go back and say, okay, we had this dialogue, what did it achieve? Oh, we had this particular thing, what did it achieve? What did it achieve its purpose, or are there certain things that we could do better? But that was it. Thank you for a great session. I think it's very unconventional, but I think very necessary. So it's just to extend my thank you to you.
Yes, thank you, Joanne. And I know there's a bit of background in the beginning, so I didn't fully catch the beginning. But I think that as you practice it more and more, how do I say? It's a practice that gives you hope, rather than doing something and being like, it didn't work, and I'm so sure it was going to work, and now I don't know what to do. It's like, no, this was just an experiment. Like, a scientist doesn't run an experiment and think it's right or wrong when it goes how they thought or didn't. They just think that they learned from it. And so I think having this mindset of every action you take, it's not this massive failure. Yes, maybe it didn't go how you thought, but there is something to learn from it and pick and move forward. And we call that the plan, do, study, adjust cycle, because you're constantly planning something, doing it, studying what happened, and adjusting. And so I have just found it to be very freeing when you move through life that way. Like you said, in advocacy, rather than being it didn't work, It's like, okay, but there's got to be something we can pick to help ourselves move forward in it. So thank you, Joanne. Yeah, Alice.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I think I'll partially agree with Joanne's submission and partially not agree. I've seen it work in a particular incident where we like had this respondent, and like in his mind, he feared that if he came for mediation, he would get arrested. So he did not turn up for the mediation. So the other time, the second time, we actually just went to where he was, and now he felt that he had no place to run. So he calls us and he tells us, I'm told you guys are coming. And then we're like, yeah, we're coming, but don't worry, we are very impartial. This is a mediation. It's a mediation, and if we can resolve it here, we shall be able to work around it. And then he kind of like got the confidence and was able to come and listen in and actually agree to the terms that were set out in the mediation. So I think sometimes like enabling the other party to understand that it's an impartial place and it's a mediation process, and that both of them will be listened to. I feel that it can also be able to go a long way. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. I love hearing that because, of course, I don't know the full details, but what I'm assuming is maybe if the first step was like, oh, calling him to come, and what you learned is that wasn't working. So then you said, okay, well, what if we go to him? And what do we expect is going to happen when we go to him? Then you were able to break down some of those barriers and overcome that obstacle. And so I think, right, as we talk about this almost from a meta level, right, we're talking about having clear thinking. And what I'm hearing, Alice, in your example is like he had unclear thinking. He thought he was going to get arrested because that was an assumption of himself. So even in your process, you guys are bringing like the facts of the situation to the clients to say, hey, no, that's not what this is about. Let me help you clear up your thinking that actually this is what that is. So I think that's really beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, Claudia.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for the very elaborate and mind-opening presentation. Okay, for me, like when I was hearing you present, it threw me back to something I read recently. There's something called the girls methodology. It's usually a methodology used in gender transformative action or gender action when you're doing activities, for instance, and you're pushing to see that people actually acknowledge that something is wrong, and then they identify it has a component that helps you create a vision. So in the event there's a problem, you identify what the problem is. Then you first set out what your goal is, and then you have to create a structure where you identify the challenges, what you have and what you can do, and it helps you push towards your goal, which could be ultimately, for instance, getting this person to appear and discuss or have a discussion to resolve a legal issue. When my colleague said that it mostly pushes, or it mostly works in spaces of advocacy, for my experience in legal practice, I believe most times when it comes to, for instance, when it's a mediation situation and you invite the respondent for mediation, the first point of your invite, I believe, is you have to make sure your invitation letter or email is clearly not attacking. You have to make it as neutral as possible. I learned this when I was working in Gulu with FIDA. We once invited someone for a mediation, and they approached a lawyer. And the lawyer, I recall, writing me a letter saying, when you're saying it's a mediation, but then you're the same person who's calling for this mediation, and you're the same person who's saying that you're representing a client, it already shows you're biased. So the idea, or what we learned from that, was to create letters or invitation emails that clearly state that we have received a complaint from this person, and we would like to hear or to resolve this issue. When you give it neutral language and you're not coming in as a lawyer, I'm representing my client, you do this, you do that. When you make it neutral, it actually works. This person will come, they'll not be as guarded, but you see, that also came from a point of first identifying what was the challenge. Our challenge was, this person is not coming. Our goal was to ensure that this lady got justice. So going forward, it helped us recraft our letters of invitation or our emails, to give it a neutral bit of a language. Yes, you know your agenda. Your agenda is to ensure that this woman gets justice, but how do you get the person that you require in the room? So this has been a very informative training. I'm glad I attended, and I would call upon everyone here to, if possible, read about the girls' methodology. It gives you a clear structure, and it also has, it talks about visioning, and that visioning can help you identify what problems you have, the challenges, the resources you have at hand, and it can help you think through how you plot to do better or to achieve your goal. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lynette, for hosting.
Yeah, wonderful, Claudia. Okay, I'm so excited by what you said, and I want to comment on two things. So the one, your example of when you got the feedback from the other lawyers saying, hey, it seems like you're already biased, and you're like, okay, we need to shift and make more neutral letters. Perhaps at the time you were not viewing those letters going out as an experiment, but essentially you ran an experiment and you learned from it and you adjusted. So that plan, do, study, adjust, you totally learned from that to change your approach to be more effective. So that was lovely. And then what you just said about the girls' methodology, I think I see a great parallel, right? Because just like Mike Rother and the team went to study Toyota, and people wrote books on Toyota does XYZ, so therefore you should do XYZ, but it wasn't working. That's because people were trying to follow like exact methodologies of Toyota without understanding the thinking behind it. And so this Kata thinking, you can overlay into any methodology. So just like you said, the girls' methodology, it's like baked into that methodology. And so I'm not saying, hey, abandon a different methodology to use this. No. This is just like the underlying thinking behaviors. And the more that you can integrate it into whatever you're already doing, then that's fantastic. I think one thing I've learned a lot is early in my career, I did a lot of project management. And traditional project management says, you identify the problem, you figure out the steps, you do your work breakdown structure, and you execute it. And yes, we do know not everything will go according to plan. But generally, typical project management says, oh, so long as we do X, Y, Z, we will get to the answer. So when you overlay Kata on that, it says, hey, maybe we're not going to plan all the steps to the nth degree. We are just going to plan like the first thing we're going to do. So what I'm hearing in the girls' methodology is, yes, you identify your challenge, you identify the problems. It sounds like you identified obstacles and what you can do, but you don't have to necessarily make a 15-step plan of what you're going to do. You could start off with your first, I'm making this up, 3 steps, and then learn your way there, knowing that, well, we maybe think those are milestones we want to hit, but we're not sure yet that those are things we're going to do. And so I just love that this way of thinking integrates with so many other methodologies to make us more effective. And I've found in organizations, it helps you to save resources too, right? Otherwise, I've seen examples where people are like, oh, our finance system doesn't work. We need a new finance system. And they go off on this huge project management thing, spending lots of money, but maybe it wasn't actually the finance system. Maybe there were other things about what it went into the finance system of why it didn't work. And so if we can figure out these smaller steps and test these smaller experiments first, then we can kind of learn what we need to learn to make bigger decisions. So thanks, Claudia.
Okay. Any other questions? We have like 3 more minutes. So last opportunity. We're face-to-face with Jennifer if you would like to ask her any question. All right. Okay, well, Jennifer, that was really very, very, just mind-broadening. And I think even as someone who has experimented a bit with Kata, I feel that I understand the method so much better. I'm definitely than I was to really learn this method of thinking and to see it as a tool of actually like shifting my own thinking and shifting my own way of really approaching the challenges that I face every day. And I thank you so much for making it so practical, for breaking it down to to steps and tools and using examples that can really show, oh, this can be used in everyday life, that it can also be used to solve more complex problems and in the work that we do in the kind of challenges that we face in really in all different spheres. So so thank you for the time, for how you unpacked it, for answering our questions. It's been really wonderful learning, and we're grateful.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, guys. It's something that I love talking about. I love coaching people through, and it's that simple but hard. Some things in life are simple but hard. So it's just these 4 questions, but it does take discipline to slow yourself down. But as you do it, it can really just transform things. And so it's been fun to see Lynette grasp onto it. And please do contact me. I'm on LinkedIn if there's any other chatting you want to do about it. So thank you, guys.
Right. Have a lovely rest of the Friday. And thank you for joining us for the May episode of our coffee series. We will be back in June. We will be hosting the Dutch ambassador on the topic of male engagement in Uganda, but more on that on our socials. Have a lovely weekend. Goodbye.
Great.